floor raising versus ceiling raising in the NBA. It has been a debate for years, and I think it's a pretty interesting debate, and there's a couple of different angles you can approach it from, and today I'm just going to talk about it because I think it's pretty interesting. So let's define the terms. They're a bit self-explanatory, but a floor raising player would be a player who could take a bad team or like a lesser team with lesser talent and make them a competent or a good team. And then a ceiling raiser could take a good team and make them a great team. And their skills aren't redundant, and they can make a great team even better. And then just before I get into more of this, all great players will raise your floor and your ceiling to a certain extent. Like, there's no player who's just not raising your floor at all in terms of superstars that isn't raising your floor at all but really is raising your ceiling. And there's no player that is raising your ceiling but isn't raising your floor at all. So all great players will raise both, but I think most of them tend to lean on one side more than the other. So if we talk about the types of skill sets of these players, because I think that's pretty interesting. So a floor raiser, what a floor raiser can do is carry an offense and or defense. It's most of the time it's the offense because you can find solid defensive pieces. And their biggest skill sets usually are scoring and playmaking. And maybe they're not great at another skill like defending or shooting. And what typifies them is they need the ball to score, and they're more effective as the number one option. And if you think of some examples, there's tons, but in the current NBA, obviously Russell Westbrook has been one that's brought up a lot, and for good reason. He is really maybe the superstar that leans the most onto the side of floor raising rather than ceiling raising. But there's other guys like Harden and Giannis who also are floor raisers. And if we look at all their skill sets, with Westbrook, he's a great slasher, he's a great playmaker, he can carry your offense, but he's not a great defender, and sometimes he can be a good defender, and he's not a good shooter. So when you put him with other great players, his value is a bit less because he sort of needs to be the number one option to be his most valuable. But on a good team, if Westbrook's your number one option, you're not going to be a great team. You're going to be a good team and a playoff team when he was back in his prime, but you're not going to be a great team. And then with Harden, obviously he's a great offensive player, and you can be a great offensive team with Harden as your main guy, but his value, he doesn't move off ball, so he doesn't provide he provides lesser value as a second option, and he's not a very good defender most of the time. He can be all right when he tries, but most of the time he doesn't. And then with Giannis, it's similar to Westbrook, except he's like almost a foot taller, and he's a great defender. So Giannis can raise both the floor of your offense with his playmaking and his ability to get to the rim and to the free throw line, and the ceiling of your defense, the floor. He also raises the ceiling of your defense, but the floor of your defense as the guy who can protect the rim and switch across multiple positions. But he isn't a great shooter, which means that he sort of needs to have the ball in his hands or play more like a center role, which sort of reduces his value and makes him less valuable, and that sort of makes him a floor raiser. So that's sort of the floor raiser, a guy who can carry your offense or defense, but maybe is a bit redundant with other players. And then a ceiling player is a strong player, with a strong skill set, but a non-redundant skill set. So when I say redundancy, it means you can have too much of it. So let's say I'm building my ideal all-time team, and I have LeBron, I have Jordan. I'm like, who should be point guard? Well, I could go for Magic Johnson, but I think that's a bit redundant because LeBron and Jordan are already very good playmakers and could do the bulk of the ball handling. So I'm going to go with Curry because he can shoot and better than Magic Johnson, and shooting isn't redundant. You can't have too much shooting, and having more shooting will always add more value. And then another skill like that is defense. So maybe actually I'll go for Clay as the point guard because he is a good defender and a good shooter, and I can sort of and he isn't redundant. He can play off ball. Off ball is also a big ability of a ceiling raiser, and So that's how I'm going to go for my point guard. So that's sort of redundancy when, a skill set, I don't need more playmaking because I already have enough playmaking and only one guy can have the ball in their hands. But I can never have enough shooting or enough defense. So ceiling raisers typically have non-redundant skill sets like shooting, defense, rebounding, that type of thing. And they're scalable. They can play with X amount of great players. They don't have to be the number one option, and they don't have to have the ball. And some examples of this are obviously Curry, Kyle Lowry, Anthony Davis, and there's many more. So with Curry, it's obviously the shooting and the gravity. He doesn't need the ball. He'll always provide value offensively just because of his shooting and his spacing and his gravity. With Kyle Lowry, it's a guy who always makes the right play, is really unselfish, and can shoot and defend. And with AD, I think this one is pretty interesting because AD can also be a floor raiser to an extent, but he's better as a ceiling raiser because he can really carry your defense as a rim protector. And then offensively, he's a great lob target and a great screen setter. He can space the floor a little bit with his shooting, and he can get offensive rebounds and putbacks. So he's adding value when he doesn't have the ball on both ends of the floor. So that is sort of the skill sets of floor raisers and ceiling raisers and a few examples. So if we talk about which is more valuable, because this has been a big question, and I think it's a pretty interesting question, but sadly at the start I don't have a very interesting answer, which is it depends on the situation, obviously. If I'm a bad team, I want a floor raiser. If I'm a good team, I want a ceiling raiser. It really is that simple. Now let's talk about maybe the most interesting example, which is LeBron, who is a floor raiser who is so good that he's also a ceiling raiser. And I said all superstars are a floor raiser and a ceiling raiser to an extent, but I think LeBron is definitely the best current case of this because his skill set is more of one of a floor raiser. He can carry a big scoring and playmaking burden, and he can also carry a defense similar to Giannis. But obviously he's shooting really well this year, but he's not what you would think about as a great shooter. And he's less valuable when he's off the ball than to when he's on the ball. But LeBron is so good that the problem where, if he's not your number one option, you're not a good team. With certain floor raisers like Westbrook, it's just not a problem with LeBron because, if he's your number one option, then you're probably the best team in the league or close to it. So he is such a good floor raiser that he becomes a ceiling raiser. And I think that's pretty interesting. And there's a similar thing with Jordan too, but obviously he's not currently playing, so I don't want to talk about that too much. But, if a player is a floor raiser and can be the best player on a championship team, then I actually think they might be more valuable than a ceiling raiser because you don't need to put elite help and teammates around them. And LeBron is a great example of that. But when you have a guy like Westbrook who, your ceiling, if Westbrook is your best player, is probably a second round exit, to be honest. And currently it might not even be that. So then he's certainly less valuable. So to summarize, I think that ceiling raising is actually more valuable with most superstars, apart from like the top 2 or 3 guys. Okay, so why do I think ceiling raising is more valuable? Well, the thing is, I think the ultimate goal in the NBA is to win a championship. And a ceiling raising player like Curry or Lowry or Anthony Davis can help you do that more than a player like Russell Westbrook. And it's pretty much that simple, that the ultimate goal in the NBA is to win it all. And ceiling raising players are helping you do that more. But just to summarize, both are still valuable. It depends on the situation, but that's my take on the floor raising versus the ceiling raising debate. I'd rather have a ceiling raising player. Both are still very valuable, unless the floor raising player can be the best player on a championship team. But that's the end of this video, guys. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.